Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
With the US presidential election just around the corner, it's worth asking how a Trump administration would differ from a Harris administration with regards to trade policy. The first thing worth noting is that both sides, Republicans as well as Democrats, have grown to love tariffs. As president in 2019, Mr. Trump imposed new tariffs on several Chinese imports such as solar panels, steel, and aluminum. China then retaliated with tariffs of its own on US airplanes, soybeans, and other goods. The two countries reached something of a truce in 2019 with the so-called Phase 1 agreement. As part of this agreement, China promised to buy an additional $200 billion of US exports. However, I don't believe it ever followed through on those promises. The Biden administration retained Mr. Trump's tariffs and added some of its own. Last May, for instance, the US quadrupled its tariffs on electrical vehicles to 100%. It also raised tariffs on a range of other goods such as solar cells, semiconductors, and lithium-ion EV batteries. In the case of car batteries, tariffs tripled to almost 25%. So what does the future hold under either a Trump or a Harris administration? Mr. Trump has now proposed raising tariffs to 10%, he sometimes says 20%, on all imports regardless of country of origin. And in the case of China, he has proposed raising tariffs to as much as 60%. To understand how dramatic a change he's proposing, the tariffs on goods from most countries is currently negligible, and on Chinese goods, it is around 10% on average. Ms. Harris has not said much about what trade policy would look like under a Harris administration, so we're left to guess a little bit. However, some people associated with the campaign have suggested that she also supports tariffs, but would use them in a more selective or targeted way. If that's indeed the case, her approach would be in line with that of the Biden administration, targeting select industries and select countries. Ms. Harris is not a free trader by any means and has a history of opposing trade agreements. As senator, she opposed the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. In the case of USMCA, her objection seems to have been that it did not sufficiently address environmental impacts. She did, however, come out against the recent Trump tariff proposals, saying it would be, in effect, a national sales tax on everyday products and basic necessities, and would cost typical American families around $4,000 each. Both sides see competition with China, especially as it pertains to technology, as the defining global issue of our times. Both campaigns have sought to project toughness when it comes to China. Whether it is through tariffs, subsidies, or export controls, I would expect protection of US technological edge, especially in artificial intelligence, to be an important priority. So why does any of this matter? Would a 60% tariff on Chinese imports or a 10% tariff on all imports be a good thing? Are selective tariffs better than broad-based tariffs? Politicians like to frame trade wars in us versus them language. Mr. Trump, for instance, talks of punishing other countries for ripping us off and stealing our jobs. However, tariffs are better thought of in us versus us terms. A tariff is a tax on imports. Its costs are borne either by consumers of imports, foreign producers, or the intermediary. All of the tax could be paid by the consumer, or the producer and importer may cut into their own margin to stay competitive and absorb some of the tax. Studies suggest that the last round of China tariffs were mostly passed on to consumers. So while some US producers and workers may benefit, costs are largely borne by US consumers. So us versus us. Another risk of imposing tariffs is that such an action seldom goes unreciprocated. Actions and reactions can quickly negate any gains for protected industry producers and workers and leave all countries worse off. The effect of country-specific or industry-specific tariffs tend to be a little more muted. The net effect of greater tariffs on Chinese imports was that we imported less from China, as intended, but imported more from other countries. Meanwhile, China increased its exports to other countries such as India. In general, it's good to remember that we don't live in a two-country world. If we sever trade ties with the rest of the world, other countries will rely more on each other, and this can have unintended strategic consequences for the United States. To sum up, I don't find much to love in either candidate's trade policy positions. However, if Mr. Trump's new tariff proposals were actually implemented, they would likely do much more damage.